Meet me at the Chazen. I'm your host, Jonathan Fields. For this episode, we reached into one of the many boxes in the Chazen archive and pulled out a catering menu. The exhibition, Russian Jewish Artists in the Century of Change, 1890 to 1990. The event took place Saturday, March 23rd, 1996, from 6 to 8 p.m. For this episode, I asked my colleagues to recreate or revisit some of the items on the menu. But before we get cooking, I asked our current event coordinator, Jamie Prey, to explain how she feeds the masses in the presence of priceless works of art.
Because we are a part of the University of Wisconsin, there's some policy about how we have to order catering, actually. So we are required to order our catering through Union Catering, which many people are very familiar with the Wisconsin Union chairs and the terrace, and they also offer catering all around campus. So we have to reach out to them for ordering catering first, and then if they're not available, we have to reach out to university housing to do catering next. So lots of policy that people probably don't realize that we have to go through with ordering our food.
So wait a minute, Jamie. So then if there was a display, or we can even talk about James Wynn's works on paper, if he wanted to order or have an event surrounded with food that was represented in those works, unless if it wasn't on the menu for UW catering or housing, you can't have it.
If they say no, we can't do it, or we're unavailable, then you're allowed to go to an outside caterer.
But you have to go through them first.
You have to go through them first.
And I'm guessing, because see the way my mind works, I would ask them for ridiculous stuff that I knew they couldn't make just so I could do what I wanted to do.
Well, there's a paper trail for everything, so.
So you're saying I'd get busted?
You might get busted, yes. If it's, reasonable. We have occasionally, we had a really nice dinner here in November, and we wanted to make sure that it was very high-end and elegant, and so they knew they could not provide the level of service that we wanted for this dinner, and then they were happy to say no. So
I'm holding in my hand here a catering menu for an exhibition opening, Russian Jewish Artists in a Century of Change, 1890 to 1990. And this event was on Saturday, March 23rd in 1996. And I'm looking on this menu, which includes a spinach yogurt dip, and this is not everything, an eggplant caviar, baby red potatoes, Wisconsin cheese board. I think that's pretty universal. We can always get that. But then I see like creamy apple herring and Russian stuffed eggs with black olive tapenade garnish. I don't see that on the catering menu that you've provided.
No, we don't have those options. We have occasionally asked them, Union Catering, to do a custom menu for us, and they have been able to do that. But for the most part, it's a little more traditional, the menu items that you're going to see at Union Catering than those.
So then if you had to create a menu for this event, what do you think you'd pick off your current menu?
For this event?
Yeah, for the Russian Jewish Artists of the Century of Change in 1890 to 1990. Let's go in the elevator and go upstairs.
Good, you're giving me a second to think.
We're going to go upstairs.
Because I'm probably going to order the same things I always order. This is why I told you.
Okay, so now we're a little bit upstairs so the dude can do his thing down there. So then, what would you? So then, if you had to create a menu for this event, what would you select from our current menu?
From our current menu, I mean, typically I like to offer a veggie and a cheese platter because those are crowd pleasers and typically suitable for people who have any allergens or dietary restrictions. And then a couple of more exciting items, such as a bruschetta platter. Ooh, not great for those with the gluten-free allergies. And then I usually do something from the stuffed selection. So the vegetable pot sticker is very popular. So is the maple glazed bacon wrapped water chestnuts. And then I always like to have a dessert item, so cookies or cupcakes or little cake bites as well. Chocolate-covered strawberries are a big hit. And then maybe one more item, like the filled tart shells, an assortment of those. And that's about half the menu that they have here for us to select from. Now, if there was a reason that we wanted something special, let's say that there's an item featured in the exhibition, or the artist is coming from an exhibition and it's really important to them that we have a certain item, we'll ask for something custom. But typically we don't ask for something custom just to ask for it.
So then, do you have to be concerned with, or I shouldn't say do you have to be concerned with, is part of decision making protecting the art? Because I think chocolate-covered strawberries, I don't want people roaming the galleries with chocolate on their hands.
There's only very few things that we don't allow in the museum. Candy is really the big thing.
Wait a minute, Jamie. I love candy.
I know.
That kind of broke my heart a little bit. So why can't you have candy?
Suckers are like suckers, and those type of things are, the chewables, the hard candies. Those are the things that our curators are worried about going into the exhibition, because they're easy to sneak in pockets, they get you sticky. Whereas if we're out here in the lobby where food and beverages are permitted, we have visitor services assistants who are making sure all that big food item can't go into the gallery.
Because I've been to art galleries many, many, many times, and I call it the white fair because it's white wine. Mm-hmm. It's bread and brie. That used to be our
policy here.
Really? Okay, so what was the policy then?
No red wine. Beer and white wine only. And that changed before I started here 5 years ago, but not that much longer than I've been here.
So then what were some of the other policies besides candy and no red wine?
Those are the only ones I recall. I mean, have you seen pictures? We used to have carpeted walls.
You
over
also
in the LVM.
I've also seen photos where there were drinks on pedestals with
and plants.
Plants?
We used to have plants in the museum.
There's a photo, and I don't think...
But no red wine.
No red wine. There's a photo of a couple of professors putting somebody in the sarcophagus. These parties were wild.
Dang.
I know.
We're here at the wrong time.
I know.
Let's bring it back.
But yeah, you could see napkins on top of pedestals. You could see drinks set next to sculptures. In the 70s, it was just the Wild West in here.
Yeah. Well, we don't allow candles in the museum, but we are now allowed to have sterno to keep our food warm. So sternos are those burners that you light under the hot dishes and keep the food that way. For a while, we weren't allowed to have those either. But now in the lobby, we can have sterno, so we can have hot food. So that's exciting. That's our own party.
So then, Jamie, are you relegated to having things in the lobby? Can you move to other parts of the museum and offer food, drinks?
We can be in the Chazen lobby or in Page Court, and that's it for food. People can bring food and drink into the auditorium now if they buy it from the Chazen Cafe, but we don't serve food in the auditorium. So it might be if somebody, grabbed a coffee or a beer from the cafe, then they could bring it into the auditorium for a movie or a screening. I told you this would be boring.
No, it's not boring at all, because I come from a food background.
Me too.
And I've often wondered, what could I do with an outline? I always think that I can be my most creative when I have an outline, when I have a set of rules that gives me an idea of what I could do. Because of course I'm going to try to stretch them.
Sure.
So what's been the event where you were just like, I cannot believe they let me serve this here? Or I'm so glad we were able to do this, even though it took more work than I had imagined that it would. Because it's also cutlery, it's all these things that go, how do you prepare a crowd? What kind of cutlery do you offer? What do you do with creamy apple herring? What do you do with Russian stuffed eggs? What do you do with, dried tartlets or tea cake with an apricot spicy butter? That's sticky.
It's sticky. Well, we don't let people touch the artwork.
You don't let people touch the artwork. Letting and people doing it anyway is two different things.
Yeah, I guess that's a risk you have to take. Yep.
I'm thinking about the Amanda McCaver exhibit in Page Court, where she had these long, flowing tapestries that were just so ethereal. I mean, could you imagine somebody just walking through there with sticky fingers?
Yes, I can. And she actually made one that was special, that was said, please touch this one. I don't know if you saw that, but she had one over to the side. So I didn't see that when it got taken down, but I have to imagine it had some marks.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
A little bit of spicy tapenade or something on there.
Spicy tapenade. Well, you asked me what I'm so shocked we were able to get away with, but I will say the one thing that I found very funny, which was what I was not able to get away with. We had an event a few months ago where somebody asked if they could bring in a fire blowing station and a sugar blowing station. And I said, no, I don't think that'll be permitted, but let me check with our team and see what we can make happen. They ended up saying yes to the fire blowing glass making station, but no to the sugar blowing station. So that's how serious they are about the candy not being in the museum.
So I could blow up some glass and set, things to 1,000-degree temperature for God forbid.
Nope.
I have a sucker in my pocket.
It's the pests. And that was the biggest fear with the sucker. So not so much worrying about people touching the artwork, but there being sugar all over the floor of the lobby and little critters saying, that sounds great, and coming in and then them potentially destroying the artwork, the bugs, the mice, things like that.
But you could have fabric on the wall and plants in the 70s.
Not anymore.
In the 70s. In the 70s. So is there a trend? Do you see that there's a trend to galleries and parties and how they're having events? Do you see that just as we've gone from, the creamy apple herring to having stuffed mushroom caps or having bruschetta, do you see that there's a trend when it comes to celebrating and having events in museum and what's allowed and what's not allowed?
The biggest trend I noticed, honestly, is the consideration for allergens and dietary restrictions. And so I do think people are being more thoughtful about having meat-free options and gluten-free options. And that's the biggest trend I'm seeing, to make sure that all the guests can enjoy as much of the food as possible.
Okay, I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to tell me?
No.
It was terrible.
It was terrible.
No, it wasn't. Because from here, we're going to have, James is going to make a treat.
Okay.
And he's going to put it in our little kitchen. And then he's going to do it, I think, on a Monday. It's going to
be like, wow, they used to be fun. And now they're like, well, we want to make sure that everyone can eat the food. But that is how it is now. And you see this menu I have to choose from.
But come on, it made me hungry.
Yeah, it's fine, but it's just, when you do 5 or 10 events a year, it can get repetitive.
Nacho bar? How can a nacho bar be repetitive?
That's true.
Come on now. There are meatballs.
I would do a nacho bar every time. For me.
At
my house.
I think that we should have just always like nacho. Look at this. Oh, fried chicken tenders. I like the ones that scrumptious. Mm-hmm. It's scrumptious on the scrumptious menu.
For $50.
Ooh, is it? Let's talk about prices, because that's one thing I didn't think about. We were looking at the scrumptious menu, and it has grilled lemon buttered shrimp with cocktail sauce, crab rangoon, orange soy sauce, Parmesan crusted goat cheese stuffed pepperdew, vegetable samosas. Oh my God, that sounds so good. But you said for 50 people that was expensive.
Well, and you only get to pick 2. So when you order the scrumptious, here's all the options under scrumptious. You don't get it all. You get to pick 2 from that list.
And then how many people does that serve?
50. So you're looking at about $8 per person.
To me, that doesn't seem bad. Is that bad?
Well, you're getting 2 bites per person. So it's not a meal. It's a handheld appetizer that's maybe a 2-biter or a 3-biter. So it's not insignificant, considering all our events are free and this is a hosted meal.
See, I think part of my mindset is that I think about all the work it goes into do that. I think about the servers. I think about everybody that goes into it. Mm-hmm. So $8 for 2 bites to be surrounded by art and it's free. You got to pay for something.
Our guests don't.
The guests don't pay for something. The guests don't pay for anything. But what you're giving them, though, it's priceless. I mean, the idea that you could come to a museum, come to a free event, that never happens.
At a free museum.
At a free museum, get a bite to eat, wander around, probably meet some cool people, definitely see some cool art. I mean,
meet an artist.
See,
Yep.
there are all these things that we don't think about or that go into this. So I would say your job is not boring. And I would say that what you're giving people is, you're making memories. You're making memories for people. People are coming here on their first dates.
To be clear, I don't think my job is boring. I just think sometimes the menu we get to order from it.
I'm glad you clarified that, Jamie, because you were kind of making me, it's like, don't talk that way about your job yourself.
No, I just would like some more variety sometimes in the menu, that's all. But we'll find the variety with the artwork and with the mingling and the music. We can find variety elsewhere.
One of the items on the menu is creamy apple herring. I'm not familiar with the dish, but our communications specialist, Tom Wilkowski, is, or at least he thinks he is. Maybe his dad is. We'll find out.
There's something that we're doing at the museum where we have a podcast, and the subject came up of the topic of herring. So in one of our history documents about the museum, they were serving food. They were serving a menu, and it had herring on it.
Herring.
And the person who's the reporter for the story said, "Boy, you sure made a face when I said herring." I made a face. I made like a yuck face when she said herring, and she said, well, "Tell me about that story." And I said, "Well, I remember my dad always liked herring at the holidays. I think it was it Christmas, Dad, when you always got the herring out?"
Was it Christmas, Dad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
That's close.
Not too much.
I'm curious, where did that tradition come from of having herring, that pickled herring?
I don't remember herring. I remember having oysters for Sunday supper, but Christmas we had herring.
Well, one year, I just remember it. It was at, I think it was Christmas or maybe another holiday. You got out some pickled herring and you said, "You should try this. This is really good." And I just like, oh, it smelled horrible, and I couldn't. Do you remember this at all?
Our aunts had it, really, and Elsie had it, and our grandparents had it.
They did, Mom?
They
You remember
made
that?
it.
They made it their own, huh?
Uncle Paul on the farm, yeah. They
did-
in the winter time they made it.
Did they pickle it then?
Well, that's not hard to do.
What kind of fish was it?
Herring.
Suckers? You don't buy herring. You buy herring and pickle it? Anyway.
No, they probably pickled.
It was
You probably
at the
pickled
store.
herring. You probably pickled suckers because that was or carp or whatever, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we used to that. Grandma, my mother did it in big crocks, big 4-gallon crocks.
Of
And they had it at the stores too,
Herring.
the local
pickled
stores.
carp. Yeah, is that right?
Well, it had to be suckers. I don't know. We didn't do carp. Carp we smoked.
Oh, right.
Smoked carp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. That wasn't associated with a holiday or anything. That was just kind of like what you do in the fall or winter. Is that right?
Yeah.
A treat.
Treat.
Yeah.
Nice. There was a historic event at the museum where I think we had some dignitaries from Scandinavia, and a herring was on the menu. So anyway, I remembered it was herring. Maybe it wasn't herring. Some kind of fish, though. Anyway. So
Well, one time Mom tried
Lutefisk.
lutefisk. That's the only time, and that was around Christmas.
Yeah.
The one and only time we had any lutefisk. That
Did
we
it go-
tried it, and the house just stunk for days.
Ew.
Yeah.
We bought it.
That was no more lutefisk.
It's ready made, yeah,
Why do you think she wanted to try lutefisk?
I don't know.
because we heard about it,
Ah.
so had tried it.
Oh, you mom. Okay, when you said mom, dad, I thought you meant your mom, but you meant
I made March. Well,
yes,
March.
this mom here. Gotcha. Okay. Right, you read all about it. You read all the hype about lutefisk around the holidays, and
We
Yeah.
have some Scandinavian friends, so I suppose that's where they were doing it, whatever.
They would have a regular dinner and invite the public to come. And they'd sell
Church.
tickets, and
Church.
if you cared to have it, and if you didn't, they had an alternate a sandwich of some kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully they turn the ventilation fans on high when they serve it, right?
Yeah.
Just below creamy apple herring and the relish platter with assorted pickled vegetables is cheese and or potato pierogi with horseradish cream sauce. Our project manager, Rachel Johnson, loves to cook, so she decided to try her hand and recreate the pierogies.
So I'm going to try making pierogies based on the information that we found in the archive about what was being served at one of the exhibitions. So I'm going to use my potato eraser, dumpling press, and a cookie cutter. Here's the star of our show today, a potato. I'm going to go ahead and set that to boil, and we'll go from there.
Run me through your experience with pierogies, because you've never made them before, correct?
Yeah.
So, but were there elements within making the pierogies that you had experienced?
Yeah, making mashed potatoes.
But you said you don't buy potatoes.
I don't buy potatoes often because potatoes go bad and it's a hassle, but mostly because when I buy, I only buy like one potato at a time, and then I still forget that I own said potato. So I do actually enjoy potatoes and potato dishes a lot. But the money is an issue when I forget that there's a potato down there, and then I remember and it's like covered in eyes and has started growing, literally. That has happened to me several times. So now I just buy a potato when I want a potato.
I used to do the same thing, and the way that I broke myself of that habit, it was that I would plant that potato and let it grow as a vine in my house, and I had so many potato vines, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, you need to, like, just buy what you're going to use for that meal, and that's it.
Yeah, and I'm at the risk of sounding like a total health nerd. I'm doing a really low carb, high protein diet, so having a bunch of potatoes in the house is not really helpful anyway.
This is true. So now run me through the making of these pierogies. Talk to me about your process, how you approached it.
Okay. Well, first off, I very rarely ever follow a recipe. So what I started with was poking around on the internet to see what people are doing and how they make them. I found some pretty interesting stuff and some records of like the oldest pierogi recipe currently known. It's in a book. I actually have the book. I don't know where it is right now though. But it's a very ancient book that has been translated into English, of course. But I started there and I worked my way to Pinterest, where I poked around to see what other people were doing, what people were calling like grandma's Polish pierogi recipe or the best pierogi recipe, and stuff like that. And I determined from there what I needed. The only thing I actually had to buy was, in fact, the potato. I had everything else in the house already. And then I made pierogies.
So what, do you remember the date of this book? Like, how far did this book go back?
Give me a second. I can grab it. It's right here on the shelf.
Okay.
Let's see. So it is called, in English, is called A Collection of Dishes. I don't actually know how to say the original title, but it's a collection of dishes, and I have the volume 1 version from. Okay, so this was originally published in 1682.
What?
Yep.
Where did you find this book?
Archivist/librarian.
Actually, I found it, and then I went to the UW library system and had it brought to UW-Madison from another university. Yeah, so it's from the 17th century. It's a beautiful book. It has so many pictures, and it's got a rich history in it, along with the recipes and several like sort of how to's. I think is really interesting because when you think of like the way recipes are written now, it's like a half a cup of this, a third a cup of that. This is like, I'll read you this one. It's a meat dish with pistachios. Take cleansed pigeon, chicken, or veal, cut it into pieces, put in a pipkin. I'm not sure what that is. Enough fine butter, crushed pistachios, broth, pepper, mace, and salt. Cover, and when ready, serve froth hot.
That sounds good.
It does sound
doesn't
good.
it sound? That sounds good. I don't mind
Yeah.
eating the pigeon.
I mean, it said chicken or veal, so as you know, take your meat whichever way you want. So it's got sturgeon dishes. So it's a really good, like, sort of historical record of cooking during the 17th century. So it's a Polish cookery book, and it at this time I think it's still technically the oldest known.
Can you find the pierogi recipe in there for me and read it?
Yeah, let me try. I actually don't remember where it is.
So is there a table of content is there a table of content?
Not exactly. So it is separated into chapters. Hold on a second. But like, I think because this was a cookbook, the traditional like separation into chapters like we normally do, like with the table of contents in the beginning and tell you where it is, it's not actually there. So I'll have to, and one would have thought, maybe to mark the page in the book, but I didn't. Let's see. Nope. Okay. Pantry necessities, garden, instructions. Yeah, it's got really nice instructions on like how to garnish certain stuff. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1 is, nope, those are meat dishes. Oh, 100 ways to cook meat dishes. It's not
Ooh. I wonder if there's a
2.
version of that book that's available to purchase. I doubt it.
I'm sure because this is translated into English. And the question would be to make sure you get the right book.
What's the title in English again?
Collection of dishes. I can send you the book cover.
I'm just curious because I'm interested in just having this book for myself.
Honestly, so am I. So yeah. All right, fish dishes. Let's see. Spanish milk. And see, all of these numbers are like Roman numerals, and some of these are so high I've never seen it before in my entire life. When I was working, I forgot where, but I used to have a table of Roman numerals just on the thing, so I didn't have to like stop and Google something every time. Because after a while, it's like a series of X's, and I'm just confused.
And then you do which one I subtracted, which one. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. It's one of the ways I keep my old brain young. So as you're looking, talk to me about the experience of making them.
Well, it took me about 3 hours. And most of that was just waiting for a potato to boil because I didn't think about how thick the potato was before I put it in the pot. So it took forever for the potato to boil. And actually, like, by the time I was like, forget this, I'm done. I'm not waiting for this potato anymore. I basically just took the potato out of the water and like took what I could. So like the core of the potato itself was still quite raw. But yeah. So I did that. I put it in my potato ricer, which, oh my gosh, best purchase of whatever month I purchased that in. And it gave me this nice silky potato. Just, growing up, I always hated mashed potatoes with chunks of potato left in it because it wasn't mashed well. So a potato ricer has always been like on my agenda. I made a nice silky mashed potato. I put some milk, some cheese, and some ghee in it, which is not necessarily a traditional Polish ingredient, but the butter was in the freezer and I forgot to take it out and I didn't feel like getting it, so ghee it is. Salt and pepper, of course, to taste. Mix all that together, and then I set it aside. Well, actually, I guess I'm telling this backwards. While the potato was boiling, I made the dough, which was the most time intensive. And like I said, I don't actually ever follow a recipe, so I gathered the ingredients that I gathered from what other people were doing, and then I just did what I wanted, which was flour, sour cream, water, and an egg, some salt, of course. And I just mixed it together until it was a dough. I can't give you any exact measurements at all because I didn't measure anything. And then I let it sit while the potato was boiling. And then after the potato finished and I made my mashed potatoes, I rolled it out and I got out a dumpling press because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get it to close well on its own. And the dumpling press, you can just add some pressure to that. But the dough is super, super sticky. So I had to keep flouring the dumpling press. And eventually I quit using the dumpling press and just did it with my hands because the dough is so sticky. And then after making several of those, I left 4 out because by this time it was like 11 o'clock at night and I was sleepy. I left 4 out to cook and I threw the rest in the freezer. They're still in the freezer. I'll eat them eventually. And I just rinsed out the pot that I boiled the potato in and put a thin layer of oil at the bottom. And instead of using butter like a lot of the recipes said, because again, butter, frozen. And I put them in there. But one thing I did learn is that before you fry them off, make sure they are dry.
Yeah, you don't want to put anything with water in it in oil, my dear.
Well, I know that much, but I did leave them to the side to dry, but they weren't dried well enough. And so I had them in a tall pot though, so it splattered, but it wasn't that much because there wasn't that much oil in there. And then, of course, with anything, don't move it until it unsticks itself from the pan. I didn't know how well or how, I guess not how well, but I didn't know like how it was gonna cook, so I kept poking at one of them to determine if it was gonna need to stay there until it was ready to move. So I did learn that. Overall, they were super delicious.
Was that the surprising part of it? Because I have so many questions, like about time planning, about ingredients, about consistency of dough, and what was needed, and what happens when you try to boil a whole potato instead of chopping it up. So was at the end of this, was the surprise that they were delicious
Well,
because
no,
you hadn't had them, or was a surprise that? What was the surprise, or was there a surprise?
No, I mean, it's a potato. That's like I like potatoes. I love mashed potatoes. So I wasn't really surprised at how delicious or not delicious it was. But I did think that if I had cooked it in butter, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much because the vegetable oil gave it a little bit of a crunch to the outside, which was nice to me. And I think more than anything, I don't know if there were any surprises. Honestly, my biggest surprise wasn't even related to that. It was just the fact that it had got so hot in here from boiling that potato for so long that my entire floor was wet. Like the condensation was out of control.
The dangers of boiling water.
Yeah, so that to me was like the biggest, like, what on earth,
So will you make them again?
No.
No?
No, I will not. Okay. And I'll tell you why in just a second. So there's a glossary in here, and it looks like basically they're not giving you like a serious exact. Well, none of this has any measurements, of course, but the definition of pierogi is just as follows: a popular Polish dish from thinly rolled dough with a variety of filling. For example, cheese, meat, vegetables, or fruit marmalade. And there are several recipes in here that use the dough. For example, like this one is it uses the pierogi dough, but it's like you baste it with egg yolks, and then actually this one sounds even better than a potato. You baste it with, you fill it with like whatever fruit you want. You baste it with an egg yolk and dust it with sugar and throw it in the oven. That actually sounds like it might be quite delicious. So yeah, there are many ways to do this, but the most common way is to fill it with potato, apparently.
So is there an actual recipe for the pierogi, or is it the glossary of terms?
Like rather than the actual recipe for a pierogi, it just gives you like a way to do the dough. And so that dough is just what you use in all of these other dishes. So it'll say like the one I just read to you, it'll have pastry is like listed, but it says that this same pastry dough is well suited for the pierogi, like that. It doesn't really have like, this is how a pierogi is made, this is what you need to do.
If you had to approach this in a different way, what would you do?
Cue the potato.
James Wynn is the Van Vleck curator of works on paper for the Chazen. He's also an avid baker.
This tiger pillow is a ceramic pillow, which doesn't seem like it would be very comfortable. I'd love to try it out, but Carolyn Herrera Perez, the curator of ceramics and glass, says I may not try the tiger pillow.
No.
Right? But this was made in the late 12th century, and it is, it's in the shape of a tiger who's kind of snarling a little bit, but he's also kind of curled up, like he's just kind of like lying down, maybe just being watchful. And on his back is this little Chinese landscape painting with a contemplation stone, like a scholar's rock. And so it incorporates a lot of imagery that has meaning in Chinese culture. And the tiger is intended to be kind of a protector of the dreamer, right? So whoever is sleeping and dreaming, meanwhile the tiger is kind of protecting from evil spirits that could potentially like interrupt that dreamer's experience. And I love that about it, right? And then Yuhang Li, the professor of Chinese art and art history, told me that these little holes that you see in the corner of his mouth, they're there because when it had to be fired, there has to be able to like let moisture out. So there's a practical reason that these holes are in this ceramic object. But she also told me that it was possible for the dreamer to go inside the tiger through these holes as another way of protecting oneself. And inside of the tiger, there's a whole like other realm that you could experience. So I haven't explored all of that much further, but apparently there's Chinese literature from this period about stories about dreamers and their ceramic pillows.
You know, James, we've had several conversations in the office. Your specialty is works on paper.
That's right.
And when I asked you for this interview to find somewhere you'd be comfortable to talk, you picked a ceramic Chinese tiger pillow.
That's right.
There's all these facets to you that are inspiring in a way that causes me to look at my practice and look at how I do things and look at how I see things. And through one of our many conversations that we had in the office, I don't know how it came up, but somehow we were talking about menus from the archive. So help refresh my memory on how we got to what we're about to talk about.
Well, you were really excited one day, and I think just in kind of casual passing, you had mentioned that in the archive you found, in the project that's going through the Chazen archive, a menu had been found, and you were looking at it, and you had this idea that it would be great if Chazen staff members could make different items on the menu, and that we could come together and maybe taste them and see what the experience of this menu for this exhibition opening was like in 1996. And I said, oh, well, if there's baked goods on there, I would be willing to bake something, right? Desserts are kind of my thing. I love to bake pies and breads and pastries and things like that. And then I forgot all about it, but you didn't forget.
I don't forget food, James. So then do you think that part of that, because you're a scholar when it comes to works on paper, do you think that having that balance is what keeps you so excited and so involved in the work you do?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think I do like to do different kinds of things. Obviously I like studying works on paper, I like studying art and learning about those things. But I also really enjoy baking, and that's like a hobby or a pastime, but I kind of also bring an aspect of my scholarly self into that work, or into that process, because often I'll get an idea, maybe I'll taste something in a restaurant and I'll think, oh, I'd really like to make this. I think I could make something like this. But I don't have the recipe. So then I have to start doing research. Okay, so if I want to make this particular kind of pastry, like what recipes are out there? And then I can read them and I can assess, I think this is probably close to what I had, but this uses a different kind of fruit or different kind of set of ingredients, and I might then read many recipes and then decide what I'm going to try to do, right? And sometimes I will just try a recipe and say, I'm just going to strictly make this and see how it turns out, but I almost never leave it alone. I start thinking about how to change it or adapt it.
So what was the original, what was the item that you picked off the menu, and what was the original recipe like? Did you find the original, or did you have to start adapting the minute you looked it up?
So the item that I picked off of the menu was apricot tea bread with spiced honey butter. That was the description. That's all I had, right? There was no recipe in the archive. And I was kind of intrigued, because I often make banana breads and like a sweet potato bread, which are actually called bread, but they're kind of more like a muffin dough or a kind of a cakey bread. I think they're shaped like a loaf. Maybe that's why they're called bread. And they're often called a quick bread because they're made not with yeast, but they're made with like baking soda or baking powder as the rising agent. And I thought, I do this often, so maybe making this apricot tea bread is something that would be kind of in my wheelhouse, and I could figure that out. And so then I started to search online, looking in cookbooks, where can I find an apricot tea bread recipe? And I soon learned that there were recipes for like a quick bread with apricots in them, but there was also specifically something called tea bread, which involved dried fruit actually soaked in hot black tea before it is mixed into a very simple batter of flour, a rising agent like baking powder, eggs, and a little bit of sugar. For example, the Welsh bara brith, which basically means speckled bread. I learned about this and found a recipe in Paul Hollywood's British Baking. I found another recipe online for something very similar, and another in another cookbook, and I thought, I'm just going to start with this bara brith recipe. I'm going to change out the golden raisins and kind of the currants for apricot, and see how it goes. And so that's what I decided to do, and I did. I actually also used Paul Hollywood's recipe as a starting place because he incorporated a little bit of fresh apple into the bread. He proposed that it would make it moister, and I was worried, having never made it before, maybe this would be a little dry because the recipe doesn't have any oil or butter in the batter. And that was new because usually the quick breads that I make have either butter or some vegetable oil. And so I decided to try this, and I made the bread, and I was really excited when it came out of the oven, and I really liked how it looked, and I liked how it looked when I sliced it. Oh, one other thing I decided to do, because Paul Hollywood's recipe suggested putting some ground almond flour into the mix with the flour. And I thought, what I'll also do is I will chop up some almonds and I'll sprinkle them on top with some turbinado sugar to give it sort of a little bit of a nutty, crunchy, sugary glaze on top, because there's very little sugar actually in the bread itself. I thought, as I was making it, I was a little worried there was no cinnamon or other spices or vanilla in the bread, and I thought, well, maybe that's why there's this spiced honey butter, right? So I just trusted that we're going to make this pretty, not bland, because the apricots and the fruit provide some sugar and some flavor, but there's no other spice in that bread. So I was really trusting that the honey butter would add some fat, would add some spice and some sweetness to the overall experience of the apricot bread.
So then what did you discover as you were making this? Because it wasn't, you're very busy, you've been to conferences, you're doing all this stuff. Was this for you a task, or was it transformative in the sense that you got to actually enjoy the process? Was this a joyful process for you, or did you feel under the gun?
I felt a little under the gun because, of course, we had a deadline to make the bread and have it in the office for people to taste on this past Monday. But I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed doing the research and figuring out what recipes were out there, how I might adapt them, and I really liked. And honestly, I made the task a little bit harder, right? Because I could have probably just taken any recipe that was like apricot bread, tea bread, quick bread with apricots, and just made that. But I really wanted to go through this effort and write my own recipe that I felt like was something I had created myself. And I have to say I was a little confused by the menu, because all we had was apricot tea bread. And once I started doing research, I really wasn't sure what that could mean. Did they mean literally apricots that had been soaked in hot tea, or just like a kind of a loaf with fruit in it that was a quick bread? And so I thought that was an interesting aspect of this. It really made me think about how an archive gives us some information, but it almost creates as many questions as it gives us some knowledge about something from the past. So I don't know that we really know what the apricot tea bread with spiced honey butter was like in 1996, but I gave it my best to offer a possibility.
Tom Wilkowski, communications specialist. The only shame I experienced regarding James's apricot spiced tea bread cake was eating too many pieces, because I was sort of looking over my shoulder and watching how is the consumption going throughout the day, kind of thing, and it's like, oh, there's still a fair amount. Anyway, it was exquisite. It was like, James, if this whole curator thing doesn't work out, I think you have definitely a calling in the world of pastry. So, no, just, my God, I couldn't believe it. It was so good. And I can't be more. It's hard to be more descriptive. I'm sort of babbling almost because it was so good. But just the apricot texture with the richness of the bread itself, and the butter. The butter was the cream, the icing on the cake. That's mangled metaphor. I'll shut up. Thank you.
John Berner, preparator. Initially, I was skeptical about having to travel all the way across the East Campus Mall to go get that little treat, but it was a beautiful day out, and I was looking forward to enjoying a couple of bites on the way back. I am going to have one criticism. The pieces were so small that I didn't make it out of the LVM building before I had finished eating it. So I didn't get to enjoy it with my cup of tea, but yeah, it was just like such an unctuous, like not too like mushy, not too dry, like very dense in the best kind of way. Yeah, I really, really dug it.
Derek Hibbs, preparator. Me and John kind of had a conversation about the perfect like balance of moisture and flavor and everything in the bread. So I was kind of seconding what he said. And I did take my time with it a little more and did get to enjoy it on the walk across the East Campus Mall. And I feel like, yeah, that the butter topping was phenomenal as well. I feel like I could just eat a couple spoonfuls of that on its own. Thanks for making it. It was great.
Catherine Alkoskis, Chief Curator. I appreciated the fact that there was actually no butter or milk in the bread because I'm not supposed to be eating dairy. So I could opt out of the butter, and I have to say it was still very good without the butter. And I do think it's the way that James made it is very ahead of its time, I guess, because I don't think they were thinking about that in 1996 or whatever.
Christine Clausen, Chief Operating Officer. I think along with Tom, I helped demolish it because I went back more than once. It was so delicious. I just loved it. The only thing I would say is I really kind of craved it to be toasted, to have kind of that little crispy edge, which we don't do here, which is fine, but it was really delicious. And it did like take me back. And I don't know really what it took me back to, but like growing up in the Midwest, I think sort of banana bread and date bread is very typical, and it was really comforting. So thank you. It was really good.
Carolyn Herrera Perez. I'm the curator of glass and ceramics. My reaction to it was, well, first I enter the kitchen and there it is. There was no butter yet. It was just the loaf. I have a slice. I'm delighted by the sugar on top, a little crunch. Really love that. The apricots, wonderful. Felt very summery. And then I come back and then there's butter. And then it became a vehicle for that butter. No complaints here. A wonderful experience. Thank you, James.
Lee Holmes, collection specialist. I really appreciated how moist it was at the top. I really love that aspect of those types of breads. And I really loved the butter. I really topped it on there. So it was delicious.
Janine Yorimoto Bolt, collection reinstallation project associate. James came in to tell me it was here, and he kind of told me that there was, some dried fruits in it, some raisins, and I'm typically not a big fan of those, but I was like, I gotta try it anyway because he made it. And I have to say, even though I wasn't like a huge fan of the texture, the flavor was really good. It was really moist for having all those dried fruits in there, and can't say enough about the sugar on top and that butter. I could eat with a spoon. So I really enjoyed it.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody. What a lovely way to round out the staff meeting today.
So then what did it feel like for you to hear people talking about something that you made that's outside what you normally present? I mean, this wasn't a presentation of work on paper or a tiger pillow. This was something that you made at home from your heart on your own time.
Yeah, it was interesting because I always like to get feedback when I bake something. I'll often have my parents try something that I've made. For example, I've been working on my own favorite recipe of a German plum cake for a couple of summers now in plum season, and I'm always sharing some with my parents, and like I have an opinion about how this version turned out, and I try to get their perspective. So I was really eager to hear what people had to say, but it was interesting how different people have preferences. Some people are not fans of dried fruit or fruit, but they still enjoyed it, and it was fun to hear how much people really liked the spiced honey butter and that aspect of it. And so I felt a little shy, actually, because people were saying very nice things about it, and I didn't really want necessarily that kind of adoration or that kind of attention. In fact, on some level, I would have been interested if people had said, I didn't really like the texture of this, or I thought it was tasty, but ... I might have liked it more if it was another way. And that just is because that would feed my own process of thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe if I, tweaked the ingredients a little bit, or I did add like a half a teaspoon of vanilla, that would like bring out a flavor, or maybe I should add some cinnamon to the bread itself. So these sorts of experiments that then I could make based on the way that people responded to the bread itself.
Or maybe, James, you just have to accept the fact that it was good. It's delicious.
Yeah.
Because I'm one of those, I don't like fruit, and I don't like cooked. I love dried fruit as it is. I don't like it cooked. I don't even like apple pie. I don't like a banana bread. I can do lemon poppy seed cake. I can do, but that's about as far as I get. And I liked it. And I was out of the office on that Monday. I didn't come back until Tuesday. I took some home, forgot that it was in my backpack, and didn't have it until Wednesday. And I toasted it a little bit and put the butter on it, and it was toasted. It's unbelievable. It's really, really good.
I wish I had tried it toasted, now that you say that. Full disclosure, when I first tasted it, after I made it, I didn't like it.
Really?
I liked it okay, but I thought it was a little bland. I felt that I kind of wished I had added some cinnamon to it to make the bread itself more flavorful. But one thing I really liked about it, though, was every time I got that apricot. I really like dried apricots, so I liked that apricot flavor, and I started thinking, how could I bring more of that apricot flavor out in the bread? So I thought it was good, but I wasn't over the moon about it, right? And so it was fun to hear people really liked it. And some people really liked it, right? Like they were talking about, it just reminds me of growing up in the Midwest, and those kinds of comments I thought were interesting. And I also think, I made it on Saturday and we served it on Monday. Some people got it on Tuesday. One thing I had read about Butterbrith, this type of Welsh quick bread, is that because it has no fat, it has a long shelf life. It'll last for a long time with the dried fruit, and also that it gets better with time. And I think that that's true. I think when this bread, when it was very fresh, it felt a little bland, but as it sat on the counter, or actually I refrigerated it a little bit for a couple of days, the moisture from the soaking of the fruit in the tea kind of seeped into the bread batter portion, and I think the flavors kind of gel in the bread over
So
time.
will you make it again? And if you make it again, what are you going to change?
I think I would make it again, and I might try this other recipe that I found in a cookbook by Mary Berry, and it is for an iced apricot tea loaf. Right. What's the difference between a tea bread and a tea loaf?
Please.
But right, this is where the process is what do they mean by these things? But this has a little bit more sugar, and I thought I would try that. Yeah, I thought I would try that.
Meet Me at the Chazen is a production of the Chazen Museum of Art on the campus of UW-Madison in Madison, Wisconsin. For more information about the museum, its collections, and exhibitions, visit chazen.wisc.edu. Find us on Instagram at meetme.chazen. I'm your host, Jennifer Fields. Thanks for listening.
'Cause that's the way we do it around here.